All right. So have you ever been like, just browsing the web, just kind of ready to jump into a rabbit hole or whatever, and then boom, you hit that
Oh,
wall.
yeah.
The one that HTTP error 503 service unavailable message. Like
Yeah.
the internet just gives you this big fat nope right when you're getting started.
I know exactly what you mean.
Oh,
Happens all the time. Super frustrating.
it
Yeah.
really is. And it's actually that exact frustration that we're going to kind of pick apart today. We're going deep on the 503 error, trying to figure out what it actually means, why it happens, and what you can do about it.
That's right. And we're doing this from both sides, too, whether you're the one trying to get to a website or you're the one running the website.
Exactly. So, whether you're just trying to read an article or you're trying to keep your whole website afloat.
You're in the right place. And to really get into this, we're diving deep into this super interesting guide from a Rebrowser. It came out this year, 2025, so it's as up to date as it gets.
It really is.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think is really important for people to understand right off the bat, like before we even get into the weeds, is that a 503 error is usually temporary. It's like a hiccup.
Yeah,
It doesn't necessarily mean the website is completely crashed or vanished.
totally. You're right on the money with that. And that's one of the first things Rebrowser makes clear. When you get that 503 message, it's basically the server saying, hey, hang on a sec, I just need a minute.
Like it needs to catch its breath.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they do a great job in the guide of explaining how this is different from other server errors, like a 500 error, which usually signals a more serious problem, like the website's code is messed up or something.
Right, like something is actually broken on the website itself.
Yeah. Or a 502 error, which usually means there's an issue with a different server that's kind of working in the background. But with a 503, it's more like the website's just temporarily overloaded.
So the lights are still on, but nobody's answering the door right now. So if it's not that the site is totally down, what actually causes these little internet freakouts?
So according to Rebrowser and some data they pull from Cloudflare, the most common reason is that the server is overloaded.
Okay, so too many people trying to get in at once.
Yep. It's kind of like trying to squeeze onto a packed subway car at rush hour.
Right, there's only so much space.
Exactly. Servers have limits, too, on how many requests they can handle at the same time. So if there's a sudden spike in traffic, like if a news story breaks or a new product launch happens.
Or even if, like, a meme goes viral or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All those people hitting the site at once can overload the server and trigger that 503.
So it's not that the internet is breaking, it's just too much at once.
Right. Too much for that specific server at that moment.
Makes sense. So you got too many people trying to get in. What else can cause a 503?
Well, another pretty common reason is actually scheduled maintenance. The website owners need to keep things updated and running smoothly, so they might take the server offline for a bit to do updates or security patches.
Right. So it's like planned downtime.
Exactly. And according to Rebrowser, this actually accounts for about 15% of 503 errors.
So it's not as common as the overload thing, but still happens a decent amount.
Yeah, exactly. And ideally, they'll do this when fewer people are using the site.
Right, like late at night or something.
Exactly. They also talk about things like rolling updates, where they update parts of the site one at a time so that not everything goes offline at once.
Smart. So we've got overload and maintenance. What else?
Well, sometimes the problem isn't just too many people or planned downtime. Sometimes it's kind of malicious.
Oh, you mean like those DDoS attacks?
Yeah, exactly. Distributed denial of service attacks. These are basically where attackers flood a server with a ton of fake traffic.
So it's like creating an artificial traffic jam.
Exactly. And it's designed to overwhelm the server so that legitimate users can't get in.
That's so annoying.
I know, right? And Rebrowser says these attacks are actually on the rise. They saw like a 23% increase in DDoS attacks compared to last year.
Wow, so they're becoming more and more common. So you've got overload, maintenance, and these DDoS attacks. Is there anything else that can cause a 503?
Yeah, actually. One more big reason is resource limitations. Basically, this means the server runs out of the essential resources it needs to operate.
So it's like a computer that's trying to run too many programs at once.
Exactly. It could be running out of processing power, memory, bandwidth, any of those things.
So it's like the server's brain is full.
Pretty much. And Rebrowser says this is the cause of about 30% of 503 errors.
Okay, wow. So it's actually a pretty common reason.
Yeah. And they say that running out of memory is especially common, especially on shared hosting environments where you have multiple websites all sharing the same server resources.
Right, so if one website suddenly needs a ton of memory, it can impact the other sites on the same server.
Exactly.
So that explains why these 503s happen. But what about from our perspective? Like, what can we actually do when we run into one of these things? It always feels so helpless.
Yeah, it can. But actually, Rebrowser has some pretty solid advice for when you hit that 503 wall. The first thing they say is the simplest. Just try refreshing the page.
Just hit that refresh button again.
Yep. They suggest waiting maybe like 15 to 30 seconds before trying again. A lot of times, these 503s are super short-lived.
Okay, like they just need a minute to sort themselves out.
Exactly. And if that doesn't work, the next thing to try is clearing your browser cache.
So basically just deleting our browsing history and cookies.
Yeah, pretty much. And that can often resolve the issue. It's basically just making sure that old data isn't interfering with loading the website.
It's like cleaning out the cobwebs.
Yeah, exactly.
So if that still doesn't work.
If you're still stuck, the next step is to check if the problem's just with you or if the whole website's down. There are tools like Is It Down Right Now that can check a website's status from different locations.
So it's like a crowdsourced, is this thing actually broken?
Checker. Exactly. If others are seeing the 503 too, you know it's on their end.
Okay, makes sense. What if I'm still stuck, though?
Then Rebrowser suggests trying a different browser or even a different device. Maybe try it on your phone if you were on your computer, or vice versa.
Right, just to make sure it's not something weird with your specific setup.
Exactly.
And if all that fails?
If none of that works, then your last resort is to contact the website's support team if they have one. They might have more information about what's going on.
Okay, good to know. So that's what we can do as visitors. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, what are the website owners doing when they start seeing these 503 errors pop up? It's got to be stressful for them too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. A 503 is like a big red flag for them. The Rebrowser guide actually goes into what they usually do when this happens. And the first thing is to check on their servers, make sure they're actually running properly.
So it's like checking the patient's pulse,
Mhm.
right? Making sure it's still alive.
Exactly. They even include some example commands for checking the server status. Like for Apache, there's systemttool status Apache 2. And for Ninjinx, there's systemttool status Nginx. These basically tell them if the server software is up and running.
Right, like, are you still breathing?
Exactly. And then they'd probably dive into the server error logs looking for clues about what might be causing the 503s.
So those logs are like the server's diary, right?
Yeah.
They tell the story of what's been happening.
Yeah, pretty much. For Nginx, they give the example command tail -f varlongeningxerror.log, which lets them see the newest errors as they're being logged.
Those logs probably look like a foreign language to me.
They can be a bit cryptic, yeah. But experienced system administrators can usually decipher them and figure out what's going on.
So like a detective looking for clues.
Exactly. And another really important thing they do is monitor the server's resource usage. They'll use commands to see how much CPU power, memory, and disk space the server is using.
Right, they're checking if the server's working too hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's like checking to see if it's about to overheat.
Okay, so once they've figured out what's wrong, what do they do?
Well, then they move into troubleshooting and optimization.
So it's like figuring out how to fix the immediate problem and then making sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly. And that might involve tweaking their server settings. They even give an example in the guide of a Nginx configuration snippet.
What is that, like a little bit of code?
Yeah, it shows how you can tweak the settings for worker processes, connections, timeouts, things like that.
Right, so it's getting pretty technical now.
Yeah, a little bit. They might also need to increase their server resources.
So like upgrade to a bigger server.
Yeah, that's called vertical scaling.
Gotcha.
Or they might distribute the website's traffic across multiple servers using load balancing.
Okay, so it's like splitting the workload, right?
Exactly. And they also talk about things like caching.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's basically where they store frequently accessed parts of the website on servers that are closer to the user so it loads faster and reduces the load on the main server.
Like having multiple distribution centers instead of just one.
Exactly.
Okay, makes sense.
And finally, they talk about database optimization, which is basically making sure the database that powers the website is running as efficiently as possible.
So it's like a whole bunch of different strategies for making the website run smoother and faster.
Exactly.
And Rebrowser also talked about preventative measures. So it's not just about fixing things when they break, it's about trying to stop them from breaking in the first place.
Absolutely. Prevention is key when it comes to keeping websites up and running.
Right, so it's like fire prevention instead of just firefighting.
Exactly. And they talk about load balancing as one of the best preventative measures.
We talked about that before, right?
Yep. It's basically where they distribute the incoming traffic across multiple servers so that no single server gets overloaded.
Right. And they said it can really reduce the number of errors.
Yeah, they say properly configured load balancing can cut down server errors by like 70%.
No, that's huge.
It is. And they also talk about using content delivery networks or CDNs.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah, these are basically networks of servers all around the world that store copies of a website's static content.
Static content, like what?
Things like images, videos, style sheets, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So when you visit a website that uses a CDN, that content is delivered to you from a server that's physically closer to you.
So it loads faster.
Exactly. And it reduces the load on the main server.
Brilliant.
And they quote some stats from Akamai. They say that CDNs can reduce server load by as much as 60% and improve page load times by 50%.
That's incredible.
It is. And the last big thing they talk about is monitoring.
Monitoring what?
Everything. The servers, the applications, the website's uptime. They emphasize having really good monitoring tools in place.
Okay, so it's like having a bunch of sensors all over the place, constantly checking if anything's going wrong.
Exactly. They even quote a senior site reliability engineer from AWS, Sarah Chen, who says, "The key to preventing 503 errors is proactive monitoring and scalable infrastructure. Don't wait for errors to occur. Implement monitoring tools that can predict and prevent issues before they impact users."
So it's not just about fixing problems, it's about anticipating them. I
Exactly.
think that's really interesting. The guide also talked about some insights from experts and the community, like kind of how people think about 503 errors.
Right. And one of the big things that came up is this idea that people often think a 503 means the entire website is down.
Which, as we've seen, isn't always the case.
Right. The server might be struggling, but it's still alive enough to send that 503 message.
It's like seeing a closed sign on a shop, but not realizing that only one department inside is actually closed.
Exactly. And another thing that's really interesting is how modern websites, especially really complex ones like social media platforms or big e-commerce sites, they might have different parts of the site running on different servers.
So you can have a 503 error on one part of the site, but the rest of it's working fine.
Right. Like maybe your shopping cart isn't loading, but you can still browse products.
Okay. So it's not always an all or nothing situation anymore.
Exactly. And then they touched on this debate within the web dev community about when it's actually appropriate to use the 503 status code.
Oh, really? What's the debate about?
Well, traditionally, it's been used for temporary maintenance or overload situations, but some people think it should be used more broadly, like for any situation where a crucial back-end service is unavailable, even if the main site itself is still up.
That's kind of an evolving thing.
Exactly. As the web gets more complex, the way we think about these things has to adapt too.
I never thought I'd find a debate about area codes interesting, but there you go.
Right. It's kind of fascinating how much thought goes into even these seemingly small technical details.
So to wrap things up, it sounds like 503 errors are annoying, but usually temporary. They're most often caused by overload, maintenance, DDoS attacks, or resource limitations.
Exactly.
And by understanding why they happen, hopefully we can all be a little less frustrated when we encounter them.
Totally. And it's also been really interesting to learn about all the things that website owners are doing to not only fix these errors, but also prevent them from happening in the first place.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to keep things running smoothly for us.
They really are. And it makes you appreciate how much goes into keeping the internet up and running, doesn't it?
It really does. Like next time I'm just browsing the web and everything's working perfectly, I'm going to remember all this and be grateful for all the work that's going on behind the scenes.
Me too. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. The whole internet is just this massive network of computers all talking to each other, and it takes a lot of effort to keep all that communication flowing smoothly.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you put it that way.
It is. But hey, that's the beauty of technology, right? It can be frustrating sometimes, but it also connects us in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago.
So true. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of 503 errors. Hopefully you all learned something new today and maybe feel a little less frustrated the next time you encounter one of these digital roadblocks.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, folks, the internet's a vast and complex place. Be kind to your fellow users and to the people who work tirelessly to keep it running.
Great advice. And with that, we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.